But what does it really take to lead a municipality in the province of Alberta? Behind the ribbon cuttings, council meetings, and community barbecues lies a role that demands resilience, diplomacy, and a whole lot of coffee. With Alberta's municipal elections just around the corner on October 20th, some of you might be wondering what it would be like to step into the mayor's chair yourself. This episode is for you, and for anyone curious about the people who take on that challenge. We're pulling back the curtain on the mayor's role with a candid roundtable featuring three people who have been there, navigating budgets, steering through crises, and yes, fielding those passionate phone calls from residents. Joining me today is Barry Morishita, former mayor of the city of Brooks, Angela Duncan, former mayor of the Village of Alberta Beach, and Janelle Saskiw, former mayor of Marwayne, Alberta. Together, they'll share the highs, the lows, the lessons learned from leading their communities themselves. Whether you're thinking about running for office this term, curious about how municipal decisions really are made, or just wondering why anyone would sign up for the stress, this conversation is for you, and it will give you a front row seat into the realities of local leadership in Alberta's diverse and evolving communities. So, with that, this is Municipal Affairs. I want to thank everyone for sitting down with me. Greatly appreciate it as we talk about the important election that is coming up. That is October 20th, 2025, here in the province of Alberta. And one role in particular that's up for grabs, and that is the role of mayor. You three have all been mayors of respective cities across this province, and I want to start with a very simplistic question to kick off the entire show. And I'm going to start with Barry, if you don't mind, because Barry, you ran for mayor, I believe. You were not appointed
Uh,
by council. You ran for mayor. What was the decision for you to put your name forward to become mayor of the city of Brooks?
I've always found myself in leadership positions one way or another. And our former mayor, Martin Shields, had decided to move on to federal politics, and a by-election was coming up. And I thought there was a good opportunity for our community to have somebody younger at the time. Feels like I was a lot younger at the time. And I think I had something to offer. So I resigned from council and put myself up to be elected mayor.
Janelle, for yourself, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, because I know some villages elect their mayors at large, and others direct elect them at the council table. Correct. So, just before we get started, was your election as mayor by council or via at large?
It, it was by council, yes.
Okay, so
And
I guess the question then is, what made you put your hand up at council and say, I want to be the next mayor of Marwayne, Alberta?
it was just I was new to the community too. So, coming from a different community, I had a different perspective. And I was young, I had a young family, I was expecting my third baby at the time, and it was just an opportunity for me to share experience. So I actually was an assistant CAO in Bicycle for a number of years. So it was just an opportunity for me to be able to bring forward my knowledge as an administrator, bring it into that public face. And I just knew that if we wanted to become active in our community, there was an opportunity for me to be able to provide information and a different insight and be part of it. It was like we have to jump in.
I have not talked about Bicycle once on my show in the 5 years of doing this. I have now mentioned the Village of Bicycle six times in the last 2 weeks on multiple shows.
It's a great
So
community.
the mayor of Bicycle, you better come on the show and talk about your
Yep.
community because I'm giving you free promotion here. Angela, for yourself, what made you put your hand up in the Village of Alberta Beach to become their mayor?
Honestly, it was circumstance mixed with general competence. Um,
Okay.
it was shortly into my third term on council. I had been the deputy mayor at that point for just over 4 years, and our mayor got sick very unexpectedly, which led to a by-election. So my council put me as mayor on the interim as we had an election and had a full council again. And then I had done a good job on the interim, and they decided that moving forward, they would keep me in that role.
That's simple.
That simple, yes. I mean, it took a lot of work to get there. I had to run for council. I had to show that I was good at my job, that I cared about the community, that I listened to my counselors. I certainly wanted the role, but it really just it came down to circumstance and timing and showing that I was the best candidate for the job.
Now, all three of you have also served in the role of counselor as well before becoming mayor, not like continuously, but you did serve as counselor as well. There may be people watching this at a later date or as we get closer to nomination day here in the province of Alberta who are counselors or who are potentially putting their name forward for the very first time and running for the position of mayor. What's the difference between being a mayor and being a counselor? And what did you learn as a counselor that made you better mayors? And we'll start with Janelle on that one.
I think first of all, in the council position, you're learning the process. I don't think people realize how intensive the process really is and what your roles and responsibilities as an elected official are. And, to be able to serve in that position and learn um, the basics of it because like I said I think we can all say I think it was a little bit of drinking out of a fire hose at first, right? Nobody really understands the full complexities of your role as a counselor. Then to have that opportunity to be promoted into, I'll call it a promotion. Some may argue that it's not, but to be promoted into the role of mayor, you are that chairperson of the committee, if you will. You are that go-to person, when things are good, when things are bad, when things are ugly. You are the voice of your community. So it does add a different layer of complexities to it. And, I just think that a lot of people don't realize, the mayor is just not somebody who has a big pair of scissors and cuts a ribbon on occasions. Again, to be able to understand what is going on with the administration, with the everyday activities within your community, being that person that's going to communicate what the public wants back to your administration and staff. It's a very complex role. And, it takes a lot of time as well. And I don't think people realize that as well. It takes a very strong, dedicated person to become mayor.
Angela, for yourself, there's a big misconception in the province and even across Canada what the role of the mayor is. And I would say, and I say this respectfully as three people who have been in that position, many people probably assume that you have a lot of power that you actually don't have. We have a weak mayoral system in the province of Alberta. We're not like Ontario. So you are one vote. What was the biggest misconception that you had about the role when you entered into it that you said, "Oh, I didn't think I could do this, but actually I can," or "I didn't know I could do this because I thought I couldn't"?
Wow. I had been on council for 8 years, so I had a general understanding of what the role was and all of the day-to-day that it entailed. I understood much of what Janelle has talked about, with regards to being that go-to for council, go-to for administration, go-to for the public. You're definitely that first point of contact. But I think that what really surprised me the most about the job was just the lack of understanding from the public about what the role is. They're very happy to talk to you, they're very happy to give you their opinion, but they can be very disconcerted when they realize that there's not a lot that you can do on your own. You can certainly have the discussions, help put them in contact with the right people, but you're not the decision maker. And in fact, I found as mayor, I was almost less of a decision maker than I was as a counselor. As a counselor, you can be a bit of a mouthpiece. You can spout off and say what you want to say, and everybody sits there and listens. But at least the way I took the role of mayor was that it was my job to allow every counselor to speak ahead of me, to ensure that everybody had an opportunity to be heard before I ensured that my opinion was heard. Uh, so for me personally, I found that I had a little less ability to spout off than I did when I was just a counselor. Barry knows me quite well from working with me. He knows that sometimes I'll go ahead and just say what's on my mind. And then the other piece that I actually found was quite surprising that I hadn't anticipated was some of the sexism that I encountered on the job. I hadn't expected it. I hadn't been raised to expect it. And some of it was very overt, very clear sexism. But more often than not, it was getting used to being called honey, darling, cutie, kind of being told to just go over there and sit down and let the men around the table talk. That surprised me the most because I hadn't expected it. I had expected the rest of it.
Okay, we're going to come back to that question in a few seconds, if you don't mind. I'm just going to finish up with Barry, and then we'll circle back to that when we start with you, Angela. Barry, as a and I say big city mayor because relatively Brooks is a big city. It's one of the largest ones in southeastern, if I'm getting my geography right here, please correct me if I'm wrong, the forgotten corner of the province of Alberta. How did the role shape you, and what was the misconception that the people of Brooks had about what your role was compared to what you could actually do?
I think I'll echo what Angela and Janelle have said about the public's misconception that the mayor's position is some sort of a powerful, stand where you wave a wand and you can get their alley fixed or their pothole repaired. It doesn't work that way, and it shouldn't work that way, quite frankly. So, besides being able to set the agenda, and depending on, what your time commitment is, I was very lucky. I got to make an incredible time commitment to the job. Um, everybody, even in a city my size, we were part-time, kind of deemed as part-time. So that's the other thing. People think the misconception that you have, like I certainly didn't look at the wages when I became mayor, and I know the villages will laugh because they thought, but if for a full-time job, it isn't very much money. So I think that's a misconception. And the other one I want to talk about quickly is that being the mayor has a really big responsibility when it comes to your administration, and it doesn't matter whether it's small or large. I would, for instance, people would, if I gave me the complaint, then I would like just tell somebody to do it, and they would do it because the mayor. And unfortunately, a lot of staff respond that way. And sometimes the mayor's complaints, no matter whether they're their own or whether they're somebody else's, aren't the priority. So I more often than not, I anonymously submitted complaints that I got at the grocery store or in person because they shouldn't have been the priority. And it's difficult for an organization to work well when you're interfering. And that's a general comment about mayors and councillors completely. But the other thing about it is that you know what you cannot underestimate the value you bring to your community as a mayor to be your community's booster, to be its biggest cheerleader, to advocate for it on every stage, to raise the awareness, to tell people in the community and outside what a great place that you're the mayor of. So it has some responsibilities, and certainly I've known the other two here on your panel. They've all done great jobs in allowing me to understand what Alberta Beach is like and what Marwayne's like, what makes them special. And that's a role that the mayor's job I think, is really important. And I don't know too many people who have ever run, that say that that's kind of a priority. And honestly, it should be.
We're going to follow up on the administration's question. You guys are all like bogarting my questions before I get to ask them here. But I do want to go back to a serious note for a second. And it's something that Angela just talked about. It's the sexism. And Barry, I'm going to apologize for a second, but I'm going to just leave you out of this conversation for 2 seconds. But I'm going to ask this directly to Janelle and Angela. Sexism is on the rise. I spoke to a few female mayors a few weeks ago, and they said that was one of their concerns about potentially running for re-election or not, was can they deal with it for another 4 years?
Mhm.
The leadership of a municipality is often thought as, and I'm saying this is often thought, not my opinion. This is often what I hear. It's a male's job. It's a male dominated world. Women just be a counselor or go be at home with your kids and do what you need to be. How do we break down that stereotype? How do mayors like yourself, in your roles, in your time in office, how did you try to break down that stereotype that women don't belong in the mayor's chair, but they actually do? Because there are probably fantastic women out there right now who want to run for mayor, But you just said it. You saw the sexism live and well. And I don't want to deal with it, so I'm not going to. So, Angela, how do we start this conversation to get more females elected as mayor across the province of Alberta?
Well, Chris, if anybody ever gives you the answer to that, can you call me and let me know?
Okay. Okay.
In all seriousness, no, we have to step up and be willing to put ourselves out there to do the job. And it's a hard job for anybody, regardless of your gender. Being female adds a level to it in that there are certain expectations. So I think that we have to show up. We have to be more prepared than some of our counterparts. We have to be well spoken. We have to keep ourselves under control, and you have to build that tough skin. But the real trick is to do it in a way where you don't sacrifice who you are and what your values and beliefs are. And that can be a real challenge around that table. I think it's important that we show up, though. Women bring a completely different perspective to the table. We are raised differently. Often, we have different priorities. We tend to be very family focused, in my opinion, of course. But I know you said you wanted to leave Barry out of the conversation, and I would suggest that that's not the right move. I think bringing men to that table and allowing them to speak as well is an important part of it. And I will use Barry as an example. Him and I have known each other for a number of years, and Barry has always shown up as an advocate and as a supporter of women in politics. And having somebody like Barry that I could go to in my years on council when I had things that I just struggled to navigate. And he was a perspective and somebody that I could talk to and voice my frustrations to in a safe space. And he would show up to the table and he would speak in defense of us. That was huge to have that kind of an advocate standing up for our voices and for our rights. So I think everybody has to show up and be aware of it. But again, if you ever find the solution, please do call me.
And I didn't mean to say that Barry shouldn't participate in this conversation. I just had a follow-up question, and you literally just took it out of my mouth. So thank you again. Greatly appreciated. But Janelle, Angela raises a good point. The old adage is women have to do it backwards and in high heels, just like Fred Astaire, right? Ginger Rogers said it best. While you were mayor, did you ever find yourself being compared to your male colleagues or male mayors in your area, and they say, "Oh, we'll go talk to this mayor rather than you because they'll probably know the
All
answer."
the time, all the time. So when I first got elected, I was 28 years old, pregnant, and new to the community. And I remember one of my first council meetings, or regional meetings, sorry, one of my first regional meetings. Um, One of the older male counselors within the region, um, after I had finished speaking, said, well, you just don't really understand. So I think what you really want to say is, and he continued on with his perspective, which was totally different than mine. And I remember just feeling completely gutted and thinking, oh my gosh, I don't belong here. Because I was intimidated. This was somebody who had many years of experience. He was a prominent business person in the region. Um, I was completely intimidated. But as he was speaking, I thought, no, no, like I am going to reinstate what I meant by my comments, right? And that was kind of the first time that I stood up and said, no, actually, what I said is what I meant. And I stood up for myself. And it took time. It really did. It took a lot of time for people to realize that I wasn't a pair of high heels. I wasn't just a mom who was looking for a little extra cash on the side, right? There was so many misconceptions, oh, she wouldn't have time to go to this meeting or wouldn't have time to prepare for this because she has kids at home or, there were all these misconceptions. And in fact, you know what? That particular meeting stood out in my mind because I told myself that day that I was going to prove to everyone that I earned that seat and that I was going to represent my community to its fullest potential. So it really did carry me forth. It honestly did, and that's a moment that I will never forget. And I think that that's really what's important. And one thing that really bothers me is it's a little quieter now, but a few years ago there was a real push for us to have a quota of how many females should be on boards and committees and councils. No. Let's have the conversation about who is best equipped to be in that role, regardless of sex, age, anything. It doesn't matter. Who is going to best represent the needs of our community? Who do you want to champion our communities? That's a conversation that needs to be had.
Before I throw it over to Angela, I just have a quick story because I helped out on a campaign a few campaigns ago, and there was an organization that was operating about getting more women involved in politics. Great organization, understandable. The campaign I was helping out on, it was a female candidate, and they came out and endorsed a male candidate because they said that would be the better candidate, even though they were saying we're going to only endorse female candidates. So it was a slight because this organization had asked her to run and they would endorse her. So I agree. Can't just have quotas. You have to have the best person in the organization. It's just if you have to stand by your word a little bit as well.
Yeah.
Angela, over to you, and then I'm going to ask Barry the follow up.
Absolutely. Just really quick, something that Janelle said kind of was a bit of an aha. Janelle was talking about a meeting where, she had an experience and she, at that meeting, had made a decision that she was going to overcome that. And I had a very similar experience about 10 months into my first term where I went to a meeting and one of my colleagues around the table told me to go bake a pie. And I did not take that very well in that meeting. Um, I believe that I left in tears, but I made a decision on my way home that day that wasn't going to bother me anymore, and that I was just going to push through that and do the best that I can for my community. And I imagine that there's a lot of women that have had a similar experience where something happened and they made the choice to stay. And I'm just so proud of all the women that make that choice.
And Angela, I'm going to just jump in quickly. The comments didn't always come from men.
No,
That's the other thing.
no, shockingly not.
Yeah.
Barry, as the past president of Alberta Municipalities, actually the longest serving past president of Alberta Municipalities. I just want to throw that title out there for a quick second. You saw female politicians come and go, and these stories that we're hearing from both Janelle and Angela are probably not anything that you have not heard yourself. When you were in that position and when you were mayor of the city of Brooks, did you find yourself hearing stories more and more like this? And how did you become an ally to support the women who were in those positions? Because they, like Angela said, while I told you not to be in the conversation, you do need to be in the conversation, and it is important. So as mayor, did you find yourself being in the conversation as much as possible, or did you try and stay back and let the women have their sort of tell their stories, because you have your own lived experiences, they have their own lived experiences?
So you can't just sit on the sideline. You can't do that. You have to empower, as a mayor, as the leader of your group. And in my group at the city of Brooks, there were no women on the council that I was on. They were all men. So perspective had to come from other places. When I was but I think as a leader, when you're there, when being I think an ally and a supporter for women, and other minorities too, because but you brought up gender and specific, and women is in politics is a big problem for us. I think it's two things. One is, and I appreciate Angela's comments. I always tried to be at least someone who could be the mayor you could talk to, or somebody with a lived experience you could talk to. The one thing that I learned very early on in my leadership is that I cannot completely understand it because no one has ever done that to me. And so one of the things I've always done too is I've encouraged, female councillors or mayors to reach out to other mayors and other female councillors who've gone through those same things, so that they have that experience from a perspective I can't quite understand. The other thing I think is that you do have to make an extra effort to elevate people. So I think I did a pretty good job when I was president of AUMA. Certainly, I was blessed with some brilliant women on the group, from whether they were on the board or the executive, and allowing them to speak for the organization, giving them the opportunities to do that, and allowing them to show their own worth. because as the president, I could have spoke every time. I could have been the front person every time if I wanted to. And don't get me wrong, I love being in the front. Don't get me wrong, I do love that. But I think it's important to make sure you're elevating and for women in particular, because there is that deferral. It's kind of that bad system. I have a daughter that's in politics. I have two daughters. Both face the same things that Angela and Janelle have talked about. And even when my daughter calls me about these things, I try to point her to another female because, well, I she's smart, and I from a political perspective and from that perspective, she's right on. I don't really know how to properly deal with the emotional responses to those things. Just kind of the subtle discrimination that happens, or the subtle patronage that happens. And I think what it really comes down to, though, is that you cannot stand on the sideline. You can't watch it go by. I stepped into many situations where someone said an off-color joke, or I actually rescued a couple of board members from certain things that happen, because you have to be involved and they have to know that they do have safe places. I had mentors too. I didn't have to put up with the crap that these two put up with, which no one should have to. And Chris, the only way we're going to do it is to continue to talk about it, to let people know that this does make a difference when you say crappy things to people, when you treat them as less than you would treat your son or your brother. We have to get over that. And the only way we're going to do it is to keep putting it out in the open.
I agree. And that's why we have two upcoming episodes of Municipal Affairs dedicated to that issue in particular. So watch out for those in future episodes. I want to turn back to the role of mayor for a few minutes. And I want to ask and I'm going to start with Barry on this, because the one thing I often hear is the mayor has a lot of power and you can direct administration to do whatever you want. Now, there is the political pressures and there is the administration pressures that mayors have to deal with. And as the mayor, you deal with administration probably more often than all your other councilors combined, because you're regularly meeting with your CAOs. How do you balance that political perspective against the administration realities that they can do? Because you want to get reelected, but hopefully get reelected, and you want to make sure administration is doing what the will of the people is. So, as your role as mayor, and those who are watching who think that they can do whatever they want if they become the next mayor of X city, X village, what advice would you give them to potentially balance that reality of what you can do and what administration should be doing?
So I think first of all, as the mayor, the leader of council, the leader, you do have to have I think you have to have a bit of a special relationship with your CAO in particular. I think that is your own employee. You have to establish that. Now, you also then have choices to make as whether abuse it or misuse it or use it for better. But the reality is yes. And I think one of the ways to get through that is to make sure you're sitting with your council and saying, hey, we've got to agree on a kind of the rules of engagement here. I didn't really have a problem with my councilors reaching out to the CAO directly, as long as they looped me in, because I was the one who was going to make sure everybody was informed. So while you should build a special relationship and a good relationship with your CAO, it's supposed to be the foundation that you build kind of a transparent, functional group with. Don't get me wrong. The mayor certainly, if in my opinion, is a terrible mayor, a bad, and I use this word without, I'd use better words if we weren't on Rogers, Chris. But but I won't, because I don't want to be edited out. But when you're a terrible mayor and someone who's more, concerned about their own than the community, you can have an incredibly be influential. You can go to the public works guy or lady. You can go to the pool and you can say things and make comments or make suggestions or tell them and create your hero moment for somebody, but you also create a lot of dysfunction and a lot of long-term damage to the organization. So, I think there's two things you always function on as mayor. One is that you try to be as upfront with your group as possible about how you're going to operate, and kind of agree together how you're going to operate, how you're going to work with admin as a group with The mayor is obviously the head of that group. But also, then you have to be transparent and completely work with integrity on that model. Because while you have private conversations, these don't not happen. I had lots of conversations with my CAO when council wasn't around, but I never kept information from my council, and I never told my CAO to do this because Barry wants it. And that's a critical thing to having a good governance model and, quite frankly, to being a good leader and a good mayor.
How important is it, Janelle, for the mayor to protect administration as well? Because we, all four of us, would agree, well, should know, and if you don't, maybe we need to have a civics lesson 101, that council only has one staff member, and that is the CAO. For anyone who's running who thinks that they're going to direct the grader where they should go, sorry, but you can't do that. You have to direct your CAO. How important is it for the mayor to also protect administration and make sure their new council, because you had a few new councils in your time, that they only direct the CAO at council, not in a private conversation off the desk of someone's desk or office, but actually only direct administration through the CAO at council meetings?
So I think that in a perfect world, we actually should, anybody who's considering running should actually, it should be mandatory for them to take a municipal, yeah, a municipal structure overview course. We tend to do strategic planning sessions or council orientations after the election's already occurred. We need to do it before because education is key. And like you said, I know so many people who get on council and say, oh, we thought that we had more authority, or why can't we tell Public Works what to do, or why can't we, change the operation hours of the swimming pool? Like, there's so many misconceptions that people just don't get. And that, number one, needs to fall on the candidate themselves. They need to do their homework. And by that, I mean, go to your municipal office, attend council meetings, ask questions. Going to Coffee Row is just not going to cut it. So that's the most important thing. Um, then once you are elected, especially as a mayor, it is so important to establish a respectful relationship with your administration. Your CAO is your right hand person. You cannot do your job without having a strong relationship with a CAO. Doesn't mean you need to agree all the time. Doesn't mean that you aren't going to have different views or different opinions. It's about establishing a clear, concise communication pathway, right? And you have to be open to learn to each other like from each other, right? That's the most important thing. And I just think that a lot of times, like I said, there is this misconception that the mayor holds all the power. Well, the mayor needs to know the day-to-day information and the bylaws and the policies and the regulatory processes in order to make that informed decision. And that has to be shared with council as well. Like Barry said, you can't do an effective job if you think that you're going to run a two-man show with your CAO and yourself as mayor. That's just that doesn't exist, right? So again, it's just ensuring that you have that line of communication, that level of respect. And like I said, you don't always have to agree on everything. That's not what it's about. But you need to be able to communicate effectively so that you can make informed decisions. That's what it really comes down to.
And this might be a question for all three of you, but I'm going to start with Angela. How much of the role of mayor is about trust? Trust that its administration is going to do what they've been directed. Trust that your council members aren't going to go and do something that is completely contravening the Municipal Government Act. Trust that the decisions you make in camera are going to be kept in camera. How much of your role as mayor is more about trust rather than actual about political gamesmanship? Angela?
I think the role is entirely about trust. And I would add to the long list that you've already given, trust with your ratepayers, with your voters, with your constituents as well. It's a lot of different priorities that you have to balance. Um, but really, at the end of the day, you don't have control over what your administration is going to do, what your fellow councillors are going to do, what your residents are going to do. So you have to put a lot of trust out there, but you also have to, I would prefer to use the word acceptance. You have to accept that people are going to do what they're going to do and they're going to be who they are and they'll act the way that they're going to act. And you just have to work with whatever it is that you're given. I trust that the first time that counselor makes a promise to a resident about their garbage being picked up and it doesn't happen, they're going to learn a lesson about not making promises and directing that person to administration as opposed to answering those questions themselves. I have to trust that when I'm speaking to a resident, they're listening to what I'm saying and not putting their own preconceived notions on it. And absolutely, you have to trust that your CAO is going to do a good job, and that trust has to go both ways. Your CAO has to trust that council is making the best decisions based on the best information, even if that's not the decision that they may want to see. So, politics is a game of trust. Right now, it's challenging because it feels like in many aspects that trust has been broken. I know a lot of people do feel that the trust with politicians is broken, which is unfortunate because that's a huge key to being able to do the job successfully.
Barry, for yourself, because and I hate to throw municipalities under the bus right now, but I'm going to have to just for a brief second. So I apologize to these municipalities. We've all seen what's happened in Medicine Hat. We've all seen what's happened in Chestermere over the last 4 years. Now, trust is one thing, but also respect and trust is also another. And you drink from a fire hose once you get elected. You have a budget that you have to pass right away, and you have to build that trust while trying to compete in the political narrative. How do mayors, once you get elected on October 20th, the night of October 20th, or depending on how long it takes us to count votes this election, because we don't have tabulators, and that's another whole conversation in itself. But how do mayors build that trust as quickly as possible so we don't have what we see happening in communities like Chestermere or happened in Chestermere or happened in Medicine Hat? Barry?
Well, I think the first thing is be prepared to be the mayor. So I think Janelle
How
said
do
it
you do
well.
that though? How do you
Yeah,
do that?
well, yeah, from my perspective, I don't think you can be an effective mayor of a municipality without either having spent an awful lot of time learning about it or being a counselor and lived it. I don't think you're in the best, you don't put yourself in a good position to succeed. They do not put glider pilots in F-35 jets for a reason, because they will die when they get in that plane. And when you see a lot of what's happened in the communities where it's happened, you generally have a lot of inexperience. Chestermere had an entirely new council, complete council of 6 new people, very difficult at the best of times. And I think for the most part, some of them were had very ill-conceived views of what the job was going to be. But every situation is different. I think Medicine Hat's different. You brought it up, so I'm going to speak right to it. I think accountability goes along with trust. You cannot not be accountable for the words you say, the things you do, the way you conduct yourself as the mayor. You have to be the first person to be able to take that. And I've made that mistake where I have, in my head thought that I was actually, but when you're not, you have to go kind of above and beyond and be accountable. You have to show your staff that you are. You have to show the community that you are. And by accountable, I mean for the entire organization. You ran to be the mayor. At the end of the day, the buck stops with you. And like I said, I've made my errors in that regard. But accountability is something you have to establish. Your community does something wrong. Maybe you're ill prepared for a snowstorm, or the water pipe breaks because no one's maintained it for the last 20 years. Don't say, well, it's because the pipe didn't get maintained for 20 years. You stand up and say, we're going to do better. This is what we're going to do. You have to be the accountable one. Whenever you shed it and blame it on someone else, like we see that happening in provincial and federal politics, we see that happening in global politics now. There are leaders of things far larger than our municipalities that have made it an art form to blame somebody else. So I think one of the ways you get to what Angela's talking about, establishing trust, is that the mayor has to show that they're accountable. They're willing to be accountable for everything their council does, for everything their administration does, for anything their community does. And we've seen, community scandals happen. And if the mayor goes and stands up and says, "Oh, that's not my fault. I didn't know it's still your community." So establish accountability at the very outset and be prepared to go home some days thinking, "Whew, boy, I didn't see that. That was definitely not on my card of things that I was going to do while I was mayor." But it goes such a long ways in kind of diffusing tension and saying that you can start over. So the medicine hat situation, I think, is one that's gone, it's hard to know exactly what's happened but when you see the dynamics being played, the things that have been said in public, certainly there's an accountability problem across the board. And I think the only way to reestablish that is if you're the mayor, when you want to get elected mayor, make sure you're going to be the one that's going to make the thing run as smoothly as possible by being accountable for everything that everybody does. You can't get away from that. The minute you do, you should not be the mayor. That's my view.
Okay. It's your view, but I'm going to follow up with you before I throw it to Janelle. If I ran for mayor for small town X or small village X, do I automatically have to assume that any issue that happens in my mandate is my fault? Because I'm the leader of council, I'm the spokesperson for the community, and therefore the buck stops with me. Or if Angela, as Angela just said, if a counselor goes out and says, "Hey, we're going to pick up your garbage on Wednesday," and that garbage doesn't get picked up, does the mayor have to then take the responsibility for the counselor's inaction or the counselor's miscommunication with the staff member instead of the public, instead of saying, "Go contact the CAO"? How much accountability is the amount that you need to take? Because some things are just out of your control. And I hate the fact that I have to use this quote over and over and over again, but Donald Rumsfeld said it best. There's the known knowns, there's the known unknowns, and the unknown unknowns. And the unknown unknowns, you can't control what accountability that's going to happen. If John, my counselor, is going to go out there and tell people that we're going to start picking up your garbage on Tuesday at 6 o'clock, and it doesn't happen until Wednesday at 4, I'm not responsible for that. Am I? Or am I? Barry?
Well, that specific example, yes, I think ultimately you are. You're the leader of the group. If one of your groups go rogue, and don't get me wrong, there are some people you that won't. But I mean, as the leader, you have to take that back, sit down with that group and say, "Hey, we cannot be doing this." And maybe we're talking about a specific incident. But in the same way, it's got to be our community, our council, our leadership that has to be getting better. We'll make mistakes, that's fine. Someone will make a mistake, but by just deflecting it and blaming and not being accountable to do something better, you are, in my opinion, making a mistake. Right? You're making a mistake. And don't get me wrong, as the mayor, I blame the province for a lot of stuff, and I will always continue to blame the province for a lot of things because they do not listen and they are not accountable. So I think the example at council has to be that you work as a team, you succeed as a team. When one team makes a mistake, yes, like Angela said, you can't control it, but you still need to be accountable for it as the mayor and the leader of the group. That means taking it, making it better. Maybe you never can, but you should never quit trying. So I think accountability never stops when you're in that job.
Janelle, I was just recently speaking to a mayor and a counselor, sorry, and they told me in the last 4 years since they got first elected in 2021, their entire council has not met once publicly or privately outside of council. And there's no fostering of relationships and there's no accountability because literally we only meet each other when we have council meetings and that's it. How does the mayor ensure that you get all your members of your team on board to ensure that the vision of your council is one, not 7 or 5 or 15, depending on which municipality you represent? Does the mayor have to look at, and I hate to use this word, doing a summer camp over the summers where all the council members get together and just go sing Kumbaya around a bonfire? Or is it something that you have to just hope people will come together after a brief period of time?
No, I am a strong advocate that councils need early on really do need to take that time to establish a relationship. And let's face it, the mayor's a captain of the team. right? Let's take lessons from Connor McDavid, right? May not always agree with the goaltending or the defense that night or, whatever is happening, but at the end of the day, he is the leader, he's the voice, and he's who's going to bring the team together. So I think that that is a mayor's role is to establish that I want to say it's an expectation early on, saying we are going to be a unified team. Again, doesn't mean we have to agree on everything. I hate when councils all vote the same way every single time. That's not effective leadership. But as a mayor, you need to be able to establish that relationship with your team, knowing that everybody can say what they want and will be heard. I think that's the other important thing that a lot of people don't um, don't follow through on, right? Um, it's a relationship. You're
How much is it ego boosting? You just have to try to boost the egos of council members because
It's not
sometimes
about
people are,
ego.
isn't it though?
No.
Because I often
No,
hear on my show that the role of mayor, and I'm going to throw it over to Barry after Janelle, but I often hear is you have to have an ego to be mayor. You have to have an ego to be a counselor. You have to be able to like call a spade a spade. You have to be able to sit down and just say no to people and just expect that people are going to come to you because you're a counselor. How much is it ego boosting? Is it
no,
not?
no. It's not
Really?
about ego. It's about compassion.
Okay, you guys are blowing my mind
Compassion and
here, and I'm not
wisdom.
liking it. I'm not liking my whole
No.
misconception
You
of the
know what
role of
I
mayor is
hated
getting
the
blown.
most? Chris, I hated when anybody referred to me. I got called the First Lady of Marwayne forever. I hated that. Do not give me a title. Do not. I didn't like that because you know what? I was a public servant. I was someone who was in that role to be a voice of our community. It didn't put me up here. I was still mopping floors at the hockey arena after a kid threw up in the bathroom and the janitor wasn't to be found, right? I was still Janelle who lived in Marwayne. Nothing changed. There was zero about ego. It was about, like I said, acceptability and compassion.
So I'm
That's
seeing some,
leadership.
I,
I'm seeing some nodding heads. So Barry, and then I'm going to throw it over to Angela
Yeah,
before I start
well,
my
I would
next
argue
line.
that that's zero about ego. I have one for sure, and I have lots of it.
You
And
don't
I
say,
sat
Barry.
and I sat with these two, and I can tell you that they carry more than zero ego with them when they do their job. That doesn't mean that they're not great public servants. That doesn't do it. I think you do have to have you have to have some ego, but I don't think the job that you don't take the job to boost your ego. I think I had more than enough when I started. I didn't need more extra job to get more ego. But kind of more to what we're saying, I think, is that I sat with councils, I sat with boards, I built some really special relationships with people. Some not so, but I would argue and I would challenge anybody to go through that they didn't feel like they were part of the team. Did they feel like they weren't part of the team at times? Absolutely. But I think overall, if you go to any group that I led, that they did. So I think and however you establish that relationship, it has to be comfortable for you. You might not be comfortable going to a barbecue at somebody's house. That's just not you. But you can have a professional relationship that's built on respect and consideration and thoughtfulness. It doesn't have to be that you're like watching football or hockey on Sundays or whatever. That's not necessary. I think the other thing too is that the role of mayor is as much about being knowing about all these things and also about when to shut up about some things. There are players out there. There are going to be players on your team that no matter how many times you ask them not to promise that their garbage deliveries pickup's going to be changing, they do it anyway. And the people that are asking them know it doesn't work clearly because it hasn't changed. They know that too. So sometimes you have to like Angel said, I think earlier, they are who they are, they do what they do. And until it becomes detrimental to my team or my community, sometimes you just gotta know to not worry about it. So it's a big leadership role, even in the smallest places, because you're the one that's supposed to pull it together, not create division. And I think, Janelle said it too, I think. really important that you become the glue, that you're the person that brings it all together. And if you're not equipped to do that and you haven't done it before, you just shouldn't become a mayor, period. If you've never done that before, don't do it now.
Angela, do you have anything to talk about ego, or is your ego okay with just not?
I will confirm that Barry has a large ego. I joke, I joke. While I appreciate everything that Janelle said, and I agree with everything that she said, I think it would be very difficult to elevate to the role of a mayor without having an ego. You have to believe that you are the best person for the job, and you have to believe that you can balance all of the things that are being thrown at you. Even in a small community, there's this misconception that small town mayors do less. I would argue that they probably do more. My husband and I used to joke that I made about $2 an hour for the amount of work that I put in. And you don't get there without some sort of an ego. But I want to say an ego isn't necessarily a bad thing. And you can usually tell when you look at a group of counselors if somebody is there strictly for their own benefit, then that's when ego gets to be a negative thing. But I think if you are practicing servant leadership and you are genuinely showing up for your community, that it's okay to think that you're the best person for that job.
Janelle, over to you, and then I got to
I'm still
switch
going to say I
topics here.
just had a level of pride. I hate the word ego. Um,
Okay,
but you
I'm
know
getting a
pride,
what?
ego.
t-shirt for you. I'm getting a t-shirt for you that says
Do it.
level of pride equals ego.
And Angela, back to your point, you talked about making $2 an hour. Honestly, and I do think that in some ways it is harder in a small community because you are expected to be there all the time, or
Yep.
you are expected, and some of it just came naturally, right? I mean, I had four kids that were in school and in every single sport, and I was everywhere in the community all the time, and I sat on every single board that there was, and I was mom, I was mom and mayor, so I think that's different. Um, Going back, Chris, this is um, early times, 2004, when I had at that time three of my four kids. I was getting paid $50 for every meeting that I attended, and most of the time I paid out more than that in babysitting fees than I
Yep.
actually ever made being mayor of Marwayne.
Angela, you rose your hand? Do you want to add something, or can I move on?
I was just an exclamation to being mom and mayor and the challenges that come along with that. Please carry on.
Yep.
I want to talk about a topic that Barry mentioned a few times. So I'm going to start with him because I'm assuming he's an expert because his past
Oh,
and
good.
everything that he's done. The role of the mayor is to be the cheerleader of your community. And that means every time you see an MP, an MLA in your neck of the woods, you are looking for a meeting with them. And that means you are going to be basically asking for the money from them to offset some funding that their property taxes would have to be raised. How important is it for mayors to have a good relationship, not with only their local MLAs, but ministers of the crown or local MPs and ministers of the federal government, Barry?
It's really important.
Is it hard?
It is. It's again. It's a work. You have to put a plan in place, a strategy in place, and then execute on it. Certainly, every community there's various levels of it. I know smaller communities don't have the resources, say that my community, the city of Brooks had, or that I don't have the resources the city of Calgary has. But there certainly are organizations that help you. But nonetheless, you have to have a plan. If in a perfect world we would get adequately funded, we would have a place at the table when it was, when it had our issues on it. But we know that's not the case. So sometimes you have to push your nose in there, and that just doesn't come automatically. So, mayors have to be, again, that kind of person that is always on when it's time for their community to be recognized. At every event, at every opportunity, whether you're gathering at a conference, whether we're speaking to a grant, whether you engage with a firm or a consulting company to do that, it really is important. You have to remember that, I don't very often have sympathy for provincial or federal politicians, certainly not the elected ones, but in fairness, they have a lot to deal with too. They have multiple communities that they're responsible for. They have a limited amount of resources that they're trying, you hope they're trying to maximize the efficacy of. So you have to do that. Yeah, it's a plan, it's a place. From the smallest town to the biggest city, you all have to make an effort, a plan to do that. And the mayor is obviously key, because you have to know when to pick your battles. You have to know when to be critical, when to actually complain. You know when you have to like be quiet and listen and understand what's going on. So yeah, it's a really big role, and in this world where we're faced with ever more, I think, competitiveness when it comes to resources, every community and certainly every mayor should be prepared to spend an awful lot of time doing that.
So I just looked at the clock and I did not realize that we're almost at the hour mark. And I had a lot more questions, but I need to ask this question because I'm cautious of your time. And I'm assuming after a long day, you want to go home to your families because that's what we do in this world now that you're no longer mayors. You spend time and you relax. What's the one piece of advice to end off this entire interview? What's the one piece of advice that you would give someone who is contemplating running for mayor that we have not talked about that you hope people take away from this interview that they think about hard before nomination day on September 20th? So we're going to go in the reverse order that we started in, and I'm going to start with Angela.
One piece of advice that I think they need to think about hard. Well, know your role, but we've covered that. So I'll take it from me personally. My piece of advice is to listen twice as much as you talk. Before you can speak to an issue, you need to understand all aspects of that issue, and that includes the various perspectives that are feeding into it. And you should do that before you start offering your own opinion. So listen is my advice.
Janelle, for yourself.
I think the most important thing, other than the things that we've already covered, enjoy it. You are going to make connections. You are going to learn so much more than you ever dreamed of. So enjoy the moments and build those relationships, because here we are, three former AB Muni board members, and they're still considered some of my greatest friends. Some of the things that we have accomplished and celebrated together, some of the things that have given us sleepless nights. We created a community, a network, a friendship that I've just never been able to experience ever again. So take your role seriously, but find those moments and find those people that are going to make you enjoy every single moment of this. This is the greatest, one of the greatest things that you can do for your community and yourself. Enjoy it.
And final word to you, Barry. What advice would you give prospective mayors that are potentially running in this upcoming election?
I think it's kind of a two-part thing. One is, believe that you're running for the right reasons when you sit down and figure it out. And then, don't be discouraged by the detractors. I think it's so easy. The loudest voices are generally the cruelest ones. They're usually the meanest ones. They're usually the least informed, I will add as well, or the misinformed. But, while you have to hear it, that's part of the job. There are a lot more people out there who think about the community like you do, who care about the community like you do, and want to make positive efforts. So, don't dwell on the crappy stuff that people put on Facebook and rant and raves and whatever. In fact, don't even go on those pages. But you're there for a reason. Believe in yourself. The community does. They put their faith in you. So, but let the detractors say what they want, but move on. Don't be discouraged by that.
Barry, Janelle, Angela, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for taking an hour out of your day and sitting down and talking to me and talking to the people of Alberta and talking to my listeners and viewers. I appreciate it. I should also mention, as my one piece of parting advice for everyone who's thinking about putting their name forward, talk to people who are currently on council. Now, we've talked about a lot of stuff over the last hour, but they're the ones who know what the role entitles, and they are the ones who are probably, if they're leaving, they'll probably be very honest with you. And that's what you want. You need an honest perspective because we have a very big challenge laying ahead for our municipalities in this province, and we need the right people at that table. So if that's you, go talk to your council. And just to be blunt, go sit in on a council meeting, please, because you really don't want to show up and go, oh, it's a 4-hour meeting. I didn't realize that was part of the job. So with that, guest, thank you so much for doing this. Greatly appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank
Thanks
you,
for
Chris.
having me.
Thank you so much for tuning in for another episode of Municipal Affairs. Now, we hope you've enjoyed today's roundtable discussion and gained some valuable insights as we head into this final days of this Alberta municipal election here in the province. Now, we understand this election is important, so we want to make sure you are informed. So over the next few weeks, you'll see a few more roundtable discussions about the role and the challenges that municipalities are under today. So if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the show on any podcast platform or on YouTube at Cross Border Network. And if you haven't already, head over to our website at crossborderinterviews.ca and subscribe to the show there. You will not want to miss any upcoming episodes as we get into October and the October municipal election. So until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and we will be back with a brand new episode of Municipal Affairs shortly. Till then, everyone.